Namaste. Welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by Razib Khan, whose article you must have read on how West lost India's cultural war. So, Rajib, welcome to the show again.
Oh, it's great to be here again. Love talking to you, Abhinav.
Thank you. So, what do you mean by this thing that how did the West lost India's cultural war? How could West lose India's cultural war?
Well, so, the title is not my title. Obviously, when you're a writer, someone else puts the title. I don't think the title is necessarily misleading. It's a little hyperbolic, but so my basic thesis, and I didn't put this in the article. So to give your listeners a sense, friend of mine, British, said, we hear about this stuff going on in India. And sometimes they show up in our comment threads and we don't really understand what's going on here. You seem like you might know a little bit about it because, look at me. Of course I would know, right? So I wrote this article. The article is actually highly informed by my reading and understanding of modernization and development in post-colonial societies. So if you think of Eric Kaufman's work, The Religious Shall Inherit the World, and the basic idea is as you get modernization, development, and more broad base to the pipeline, to the elites, to the ruling classes, you're actually going to get it so that it's less cosmopolitan because you bring people into the system who don't have, the elite family lineage, so to speak. And so to give a non-Western example, the liberal parties in Europe went into decline when universal suffrage occurred, right? So when all people could vote, all of a sudden liberalism was not the dominant position. Well, the dominant position was conservative or far left, right? And so my hypothesis is, even though India is a universal suffrage country, obviously, since its independence, and I think even before that during the Dominion, people were not voting in a way that really reflected that, insofar as there was this post-colonial elite, and I use the example of Nehru and Jinnah because people need examples. I can't just put scatter plots out there of basically they're Western men. My understanding is they're basically Western men. They're strongly identified with these cultures that they come from, so they have obviously a hybrid aspect to their identity. But from what I remember, Jinnah wrote The Discovery of India partly because it was his own rediscovery of India. Because he was a wealthy man, educated in England. He was of the Anglophile, English-speaking people's elite. He was a Fabian. He was a Fabian with brown skin. Jinnah, if you go online, there's a lot of argument. A lot of Muslims don't like the fact that it does seem like Jinnah was an identitarian Muslim. He believed in Islam as an identity, but he liked to drink gin. There's stuff about how he liked ham sandwiches, like British gentlemen of his period. He didn't know any lines from the Quran, so he'd have an ulem whispered in his ear right before a speech, as he started developing this religious identity for himself. I don't think someone like Modi is like that at all. I think Modi has a level of authenticity because of where he's from, and people online. So I got a lot of attacks from the left and the right. The far right, or the trad right, I guess is what you would say. I don't know what you would. So the right were kind of offended because I said he got a third-class degree from University of Delhi, and I was contrasting that with Nehru. Now, I don't necessarily think Nehru is that smart. Some of these rich people, they just get these degrees as finishing schools, right? But my point was, he is a literal man of the people. He doesn't have to pretend. Okay. A lot of populists have to pretend, or they have to affect a certain cultural. So people often say Modi is the Indian Trump, but I think that's false because Trump is more the American Modi, insofar as he's a very wealthy man who has wealthy connections, but he affects a populist air. I don't think Modi needs to work to do that. He is from the people in a very concrete sense. The Trump is not from the people. And I brought up his caste. He's OBC, stuff like that. I think it's relevant. I'm not a specialist on India. I'm not Indian. I don't know that much about India. So, I actually asked, what did I get wrong? And because a lot of the leftists were saying that this was just so laughably stupid, but they wouldn't tell me what I got wrong.
Yeah. So why was it stupid according to the left?
They wouldn't tell me.
But they never tell
They,
anything. That's the whole point.
okay, so but that's what I encountered, because I was looking and I was like, okay, so what did I get wrong? Because I'm being pretty frank here. I'm not an India specialist.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't speak about India in the same way that I would speak about genetics, where like, okay, like I know what I'm talking about here. This is kind of like gleaning from talking to my Indian friends, from reading, and also like it wasn't explicit in the article, but this is extremely informed by my global theoretical understanding of how cultural development works. Okay, there's going to be a swing towards conservatism and populism naturally, with universal suffrage and economic development together, as petit bourgeois from rural areas come into the ruling class. So the AKP in Turkey is another example of what I'm talking about here. Okay. So whereas the old secular elite is like, how could these people come to power? Well, you gave them the vote.
Hmm.
You allowed economic development to happen. You think that they're going to be silent indefinitely? No, eventually they're going to have their own voice because they have economic power and they went to university in the United States. That's what led to the development of the new right. In the 1970s, as a generation of evangelical Protestants educated at universities entered the public discourse as something beyond just dismissible hicks. Okay, I mean, ultimately, that's the GI Bill was passed by America's elite to educate the people, but once the people were educated, they were a little disturbed at what they found the people actually thought and wanted, right? And so that's the framework that I think about for India, where my personal experience with Indians is, it's not like they were ever that secular, quote unquote. Indians are very conscious of religion and caste and jati varna and all these other things, but there was a mythology promoted by the cultural elite that for example, the Hindu-Muslim tensions. Well, that's the British. I think that's just a lie. Okay, it's a lie that they promoted for decades, and it's a noble lie. I don't think any of them really believe it. But it was a noble lie that they think is necessary to maintain amity between the two peoples within the Indian Republic. I think that on the popular level, it's always been understood to be a lie. And now that someone like Modi and the BJP are in power, they're ripping the mask off the lie, and that's causing a lot of pain, cultural pain,
Yeah, I agree to that because last year I remember when Bhumi Pujan of Ram Mandir in Ayodhya was being done, I wrote an article saying this is the twilight of the First Republic, where all the myths associated with the First Republic, which is the Nehruvian Republic of idea of India and secularism, are simply collapsing. Because this is a continuation of the historic process in India of the rise of a Hindu nation, which started, let's say, somewhere around 18th century or something. I would say. But why did the West fail to note it? Why did the West buy into this post-colonial
Mm-hmm.
self-description of a very small Indian elite of being secular, liberal, and whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
given that the West has far more greater resources and better academic traditions than India to actually go and study the society, especially the social
Mm-hmm.
sciences. So how did they miss it?
I mean, my straightforward hypothesis is, the Western cultural elites are hooked into the English-speaking cultural elites of India. So people in the West know who Arundhati Roy is. Salman Rushdie is a somewhat different figure because I don't even know if you can call him Indian anymore, and he's not actually like very far left, really. He's more heterodox, so I don't want to like put him, but I'm just saying the cultural figures that from India, if you are a Western person, are not representative of the people. And that's always going to be true because, the average Indian is still a peasant. Okay. But now the cultural elites themselves are becoming more diverse,
Mm.
and they're hooked into a certain segment of the cultural elites. And so one thing that I alluded to is this global culture war that's happening, where the Indian left is aligning itself to the global left. And so American Westerners, leftists, are starting to have opinions about Hindu nationalism, because they don't know anything about Hindu nationalism, but they know that the people they're aligned with are against Hindu nationalism. The people they're aligned with are telling them, the Hindu nationalists, that people like you are white supremacists. So I'm only half joking. You know, I'm only half joking, right?
Yeah. But but that's my question. Is it some willful blindness? Because you see, when you look at the India coverage in the Western media, uh, it's always negative. I mean, I've hardly find anything which is written positive about India, and not just after Modi came to power, even before that. So I started reading Economist when I was in graduation and so on. I stopped reading it after 3 years because it was always negative, and we can see that it was not just negative; it was also bogus to a large extent. So why is that? Is it some willful blindness? Is it just the ideological
So
blinkers?
I don't think, I don't think actually there's deep ideological reasons for it. There are, like, for example, there's some deep ideological reasons in the United States for the Israel-Palestine debate to be framed in a particular way. We're generally pro-Israeli. There are some, anti-Israeli left-wing elements, but in general, I think with India, if I had to guess, I think, let's be honest, there's been a culture of poverty pornography that India is a mass producer of for the Western world. And the counter narrative of India rising is relatively recent. And also, unlike, so the United States gutted its manufacturing sector by exporting to China, but those are manual workers. They're skilled manufacturing workers. Nobody in the media and the intelligentsia knows who these people are. They're not in their family. When outsourcing started happening to paralegals, to software engineers, to India, these are people that are in their family, and so people got really concerned. And so you had the poverty porn that faded, and then outsourcing happened, but that was actually concerning to people. Like that affected the white collar class in the United States in a deep way. And so, in 2004, John Kerry, the Democratic nominee, was talking about Benedict Arnold CEOs, and he was talking about CEOs outsourcing to India. And obviously, Trump had a nativist, anti-free trade pivot. So I think in the United States in particular, there tends to be kind of like a withdrawal into ourselves, because we are still great number one power with all this wealth, and that's a luxury we have. I think in Britain it's a somewhat different thing, where they have a romantic nostalgia for the past, when they were the greatest nation in the world. And so the fact that India doesn't fit into their particular narrative, I think, is a little uncomfortable, because it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that the nation that you ruled, with a bayonet, now has a larger economy than you. Depending on how you estimate it, COVID-19 has not been the best for India, right? But now, like, India has a bigger economy than Britain, right? With PPP for sure. But so I think that there's a little of that going on culturally. It's almost like India is not. I think the issue is India is not totally alien in a way that China would be, for example. Like, the Indian cultural elites have an affinity for the Western, British, and American cultural elites, and vice versa. And so you have to understand this, where I think there is the masses who don't necessarily interact too much, but at the elite levels, there's kind of an understanding and a connection there. And so the overthrow, in a way, of the Indian cultural elite from below, which was going to happen always, is traumatic for the Indian cultural elite, but it's also somewhat traumatic indirectly for the other groups that they interact with abroad, who see this, distress, and they feel for them, because these are the people who they identify with. I think, if you want me to psychoanalyze it, I think that's what's going on. Another thing is, I brought up Priyanka Chopra. There are a fair amount of Indian cultural elites that are pivoting, that are shifting, because they were always more conservative, they were always more populist, even if they faked it to make it, right? Because there was certain power structure. There are people whose families were supporting Indian National Congress for like 50 years that just switched just like that. But that's because they were never really Fabian socialists in the first place. It's just Nehru kind of contingently set in place this precedent, right? So I think that that's been changing. And so Priyanka Chopra, she's been having to navigate to the fact that, like, in the United States, as a celebrity, she has to support Black Lives Matter. But in India, she's been kind of pivoting a bit to the right, from what I understand, which is a problem, because Hindu nationalists are white supremacists. The caste system, all that stuff. So I know it's like, it sounds ludicrous, but I think that there is an absurdity to it, where it's not based on any concrete thing. It's just based on feelings and impulses. One of the issues is, I mentioned this, white nationalists and white supremacists have taken on Indian motifs, right? And so sometimes, like, I mentioned the term Kali Yuga once, and someone said, isn't that an alt-right idea? And so it's like, people forget that actually there's this whole civilization of 1 billion people who that was part of their ideology, and some white supremacists borrowed it. But now the white supremacists borrowing, it's like the swastika, right? So the co-option, the borrowing becomes the thing in and of itself, and India becomes kind of secondary and marginalized. And I think that's causing a cultural issue in terms of the optics. And the issue of caste is, I think people need to be really careful about not being sloppy. But Americans are sloppy because we don't care, because we only want to use other people's. We want to use concepts for our problems, for our issues. We don't actually want to understand them in and of itself. I'm very, very careful about using the term caste for what's happening in America, partly just because there's this nation called India that has caste. And it's still around. So if this was a thing of the past, I think reusing the terminology is kind of okay. I think the problem happens to be that there are already people that are dealing with it. They use the term, and like now you're causing issues. Like I don't like the borrowing. Another thing I'll tell you, unrelated to the piece, like I had on Clubhouse, which I'm sure we'll be talking on Clubhouse when Android gets online in May. Is there's been an issue where someone got angry because I said Modi had a third class degree from University of Delhi, and I was basically dismissing him, and I wasn't. I was describing him. I kind of respect someone who may not have academic credentials, and yet they become the leader of the world's largest democracy, pretty soon the world's largest country population-wise in the world. I mean, it's like you shouldn't always infer from what someone says what they're intending. And I was trying not to be very clear what I was intending. Like some people were asking, well, does he support Hindu nationalism or does he oppose it? And I'm not Indian. I'm an American. What I think is irrelevant. I don't really have strong thoughts on this because it's your country, not mine. I mean, I like to mind my own business. Maybe I'm a little weird this way. So in any case, they were offended that I was dismissing Modi. And, then, I was talking about like problems happening in India, like the rapes. Okay. And I understand that not all Indian men are rapists. I'm a brown guy myself, and I understand that that's not a generalization you should make, but people should also confront the negative things about their nation so that they can overcome them. This is not falling into poverty porn. That's a whole different thing. That's like uniformity. Indians have agency, whatever their religion, whatever their, jati var, whatever, they have agency. And so that's what I'm trying to get across in this piece. This is a nation now with agency. It's shedding its colonial legacy and it's becoming a new thing. Now, this thing is not before 1205 AD. It is not like, the Hindu Rashtra of the Mauryas or the Guptas. This is a new thing. It is a reaction to modernity. It is integrating aspects of modernity, and it is synthesizing it, in my opinion, with the native cultural strains. And so obviously it's going to be novel, it's going to be new, and it's going to be disturbing to some people. But I think that this is just a reality we have to confront, whether we think it's positive or negative. And my piece was an attempt to understand it analytically.
Yeah, but when the Westerners say that Hindu nationalism is just like white supremacism and so on, there's a huge problem out there, because if you see, you can't really classify Hindu nationalism from the Western perspective. And I'm not like those people who say you just can't classify anything because it's Western or Eastern. I'm saying it's difficult because Hindu nationalism is very anti-caste. In fact, the casteist people in India hate Hindu nationalism. The people who claim to be real Hindus or who want to restore real India, they don't like Hindu nationalism because Hindu nationalism is anti-caste. It is seeking to promote a new kind of modern nation ideology. Also, if you look at Yogi Adityanath in UP, who is apparently the favorite villain of the global left elite these days in India, because Modi is apparently moderate now and Yogi Adityanath is the villain. His all policies are social progressive policies, whether it's related to the education or to transgender people or to LGBT people or to the Dalits in the lower caste. He's a social progressive. So how does you see Hindu nationalism from a Western prism?
So I think I think the issue here is there's twofold. One fold is deep and substantive, and I'll get to that in a second. And the other fold is kind of superficial. In Hindu nationalists, they need more people like you and fewer people where English is not their first language. So I'm assuming I don't speak, okay, like I don't really speak Bengali very well. Like I'm an English speaker. And so, when I say that someone has polish, they need to have some polish to present themselves. So, like to give an example, like my piece was actually pretty well received by many Hindu nationalists, I think, including people associated with the BJP. But every time this happens, and you've seen this on Twitter, once it gets beyond like the first 1 to 200 quote tweets, they start attacking me as a jihadi because of my name. Now, I find it pretty amusing, but you can understand how people view this sort of behavior.
Because your name is Khan.
yeah. Because I mean, obviously, because my name is Khan, so you have to be scared of me. You remember what Khans did to you, like I see. I don't like react the way they do. Then it gets they get
That's
even
going
more.
to trigger lots of people.
Yeah, of course they're going to be triggered because they fear they want to. They hate me because they want to be me. But but my point is, you need to present a face to the world that can speak on the world's own terms and isn't characterized by resentment, envy, reflexive rage, right? And there's a place for all those things, but that can't be your full face, and that tends to be an unfortunate issue. I do chalk some of this up to lack of English fluency. Just the fact that a lot of Hindu nationalist people on the right are probably speaking the vernacular, that's what they think in, that's what they write in. And so they probably are much more articulate. I'm being charitable here, but that's my assumption. And so in contrast, the secular left, they have a huge English oriented, English language, culturally fluent elite. So this is an element of style, presentation, disposition, right? I think there is a deep substantive issue, though, with the idea of what it means to be Hindu, what the Hindu Rashtra is, how it relates to, say, Islamic fundamentalism or Christianism or Christian evangelical fundamentalism. I think there's not an understanding of what it is and what it means. And then this is not a deep substantive philosophical thing, but a lot of Hindus, just like a lot of people in developing societies, are prejudiced. Okay. In terms of I don't obviously I'm friends with a lot of Hindu nationalists. I don't think that they're like genocidal against Muslims, but a lot of Hindus in general, of all the political stripes, for example, are prejudiced against Muslims, and a lot of Muslims are prejudiced against Hindus. This is just a fact. And Westerners have gotten good at kind of hiding their prejudice. Like Westerners are prejudiced too.
Yeah.
But like there's ways you can like kind of channel your prejudice or keep it to yourself. And Indians are not so good about that. And so like it shows, like, for example, the reaction to me, which I find amusing, because I don't understand your insults, you people's insults. I don't understand them. So I find it amusing. My Indian friends are very embarrassed, by this reaction. So, you need to think about like, what I'm trying to say is like the prejudice aspect is going to be a big issue, and prejudice is not always bad. You should be prejudiced against certain types of people that are bad, and also like you're prejudiced in favor of your family. Does that make sense? But like how the prejudice shakes out, like it's a big thing in terms of the West. So for example, prejudice against women, it doesn't have as much of like Saudi Arabia is still part of the Congress of Nations, but South Africa wasn't. Do you see what I'm saying? So prejudice on racial terms. So this idea of caste prejudice is a big deal, but also like Islamophobia and prejudice against Muslims. And I guess one thing that I would say is for Hindu nationalism to appeal to people, I think from a Western perspective, it needs to figure out a way to have like extensibility, some aspect of universality. Like it's obviously about India, but it needs, I think, a currency of universality to communicate with other people. It's easy to talk to an Indian and talk to a Hindu and be, this is about your people, your history, your ancestry. Like we are, we're bringing it to the modern world. We're making you proud to be who you are, who you always were. That's an argument you can give to people, but that's an argument, that's an inward facing argument. Like what argument do you give to someone from, say, Portugal or Japan? Like what do you say about Hindu nationalism? What do you say about it? They're not Indian. Like if you're Muslim, if you're Islamic fundamentalist, you have an argument. Like we're giving you the message and the truth, and we want you to be saved too. That's a universal argument. You might not agree with it, Like, what's the Western argument? Western argument is like, we want you to be liberated too. We want you to like, have your individual rights, individual freedom. I mean, so I think that's a serious problem. There's no proactive, clear argument aside from we're Hindu and that's what we are. Okay, so
that's a very important point, Razib. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like so the Hindu nationalism can do fine in India, but like, why doesn't it do well elsewhere? Well, because like all you're asserting is we're Indian and we're here, and deal with it. And it's like that's an argument, but it's not one that's going to fly well with intellectuals. Intellectuals need to deal with the currency of intercultural values. And so what is the value that the Hindu Rashtra is bringing? Like this is what I always, this Abhinav, this is what I tell you in your circle of, international facing Hindu nationalists, like, how do you guys create a positive vision as opposed to a reactive vision? Okay. So for example, I think Hindu nationalists are right to be worried about the influence of Islam in India. This is just, okay, 1/3 of people who are Indian are Muslim. Okay, like that's just an issue. I mean, if you care about the architecture and the history of India, if it becomes 90% Muslim, that's going to be like for the history books, some specialists in universities. It won't be a living tradition, right? So do you care about that? You do care about that. So this is why you're a Hindu nationalist, and this is why you're worried about Islam, and you have to be frank about it. But how do you state it? How do you say it to people in terms of like in an intellectual way, right? So if you're a Christian, you make the argument, well, we have a message, we have the good news, and you're not correct. And it's a better way, like, so if I was a Hindu nationalist, which I'm not, because I'm not Hindu and I'm not Indian, et cetera, but my vision would be like, India is a pluralist civilization that's managed to maintain diversity in unity, which is a cliche, but it's actually true. And, instead of flattening cultures, it integrates your cultural past and it doesn't erase. And so we're offering a vision. So like, to be a Hindu nationalist and talk to an Iranian, you can actually make an argument to an Iranian and say, you have your own culture before Allah, before Islam. Like, read Ferdowsi and see what he says. They knew, and you still know. And we want you to be who you really are as an Iranian of Iran, right? I mean, I'm just like giving you an example of like, how would you speak to people? Don't, because like they're Shia Muslim, they're Muslims, and you can say, you can be whatever you want, you can believe whatever you want. But our argument to you is like, we're being the way that you should be. Does that make sense?
Like you should lots of sense, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you should go to Persepolis and see this as your ancestors, and not just feel weird about it because they're pagans.
Yeah,
because that's what we are.
But that is already true. So if you listen to the Hindu nationalist, and let's say what we call Hindu right in India or Hindu nationalist in India, we tend to club up every strands into it. Also the social orthodoxy, which is completely against the Hindu nationalism. But if you listen to the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, you read them, they see themselves as guardians of the diversity in India. They see themselves as the defenders of this kind of diversity of faith and traditions in India. And they say, look at Pakistan. Pakistan is India under Islam. And it's a completely now monolithic culture. It's becoming a completely homogeneous culture of a very destructive variety. We are seeing the protests going on in the Pakistan and all. So it's already there.
And so he does this in English?
Sorry?
Does he speak in English?
Not very sure. Yeah, he does, but he gave a lecture 3 years back in Delhi. Several days. It was a series of lecture of several days, and they were question and answer. I think that's a must listen for anyone who is interested in what RSS is saying. Right? So it completely defies the standard description of Hindu nationalist, especially RSS in the Western world. And and there's a problem out there because it's a long story. So there was this scholar from America, very famous scholar who has written books on RSS. He once told that when he was in India for the first time, he met this high priestess of Indian academia, and he was asking her about RSS and Hindu nationalism and so on, and she was giving all the answer. And then he asked, could you please give me contact of some RSS person so that I can go and talk to them? And she said, why do you want to meet them? So he said, when I'm writing about them, I would like to talk to them. He said, no, no,
Mhm.
no. What's the point of talking to RSS? I'm telling you what they are. Everyone knows what they are. So I think there's a disconnect between the Western academy and the media in the terms of interaction with the Hindu nationalist. Also, because I think that because of rise of the far left in the Europe, especially this woke culture, they tend to find out the worst possible aspects and then portrays as the Hindu nationalist.
Mhm.
Do you think that is happening? Because
Mhm.
if you find any fringe element and say this is what Hindutva is, this is what Hindu nationalism is. Do you
Yeah,
think this rise of wokeism is also playing a role out here?
it is. It is because wokeism is rhetorically egalitarian. Is egalitarian in Hinduism, Hindu nationalism. I mean, it's not anti. It has it does. I think it has to propose a limiting principle to egalitarianism in terms of flattening. Right. So I mean that's ultimate leveling, flattening egalitarianism. Where in the United States, diversity means everyone looks different and has the same thoughts. And that's Hindu nationalism. I mean, traditional cultures in general, not just Hindu nationalism. I mean, even like Islamic fundamentalism, at least traditional Islam, like has basically traditional religion is going to have a limiting principle on this because that's a totalitarian extremist ideology. I think with wokeism, part of the issue is all the people know about India is caste. And that triggers them because they have certain ideas and they that's what they associate with India. India is associated with this particular social structure, and until that association is broken, they're gonna. That's so you start with a deficit in the bank that you have to overcome. One thing that I think I don't know of any Indian. Like I know there are some Indians who try to write from an Indian perspective. Not necessarily hardcore Hindu nationalists, but if they were in India, they would definitely be of that sort. But they're not like academic intellectuals, and so they're not taken as seriously as they would be if they were in the university. So unfortunately, well, so do you know who Tariq Ramadan is?
Yeah.
So he's basically in bad odor because he turns out he's a alleged rapist now. But he wrote a lot of stuff from a conservative Muslim perspective for the Western audience. And I read some of his books, and I'm like, okay, this is like a legit academic work. I don't agree with it, but he's presenting the viewpoint in the terms of the West on its own terms, and that does need to happen. There are conservative Christian philosophers and intellectuals that do the same thing, and they basically are going into hostile territory because they know that, the academy is not friendly to that, but they do what they have to do, and that's their role. Like they go into hostile territory. There's other people who are apologetics, who like talk to your, preach to the choir. That's a whole different thing. And I think Hindu nationalists have a fair amount of that. I just don't think they have prominent outward facing intellectuals that I can see. I mean, I think someone like you, whatever, like I know you're a smart guy. But I mean, I'm talking about people more like you know what I'm saying? Rather than, there are Indian Americans and, they made a lot of money. They're retired now and they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to write a book. And that's not the same thing because their ideas aren't necessarily wrong, but they're not polished and they don't use the academic terminology. They don't use footnotes. You just have to do that, And so you need to enter the arena that they're in rather than just ignoring that arena. As far as the global left, I don't know the detail because I'm not part of it, but there's obviously coordination and many interconnections. And sometimes, and I think I indicated this in the piece, it's almost random. How is it that these rich upper class Indians are the marginalized while, OBC Hindu nationalists are white supremacists? Well, it's just some weird algebra happened to be like the rich upper caste Indians are the ones that are talking to these global left people, and they went to the same schools. They all went to NYU together or something, and so they're their friends. So they're not going to say bad things about them, right? And so they're going to overcome a lot of, or ignore a lot of the hypocrisy. And no one's perfect, so you just ignore the sins of your friends and you highlight the sins of your enemies. Like this sort of thing happens all the time. So I think one thing that you're pointing out is a lot of the push for modern day, like my understanding is like a generation ago, Hindu nationalism was still dominated by, the upper caste element, Brahmins and some of these Baniya groups, right? Whereas like today, it's being driven by more OBCs and middle caste, it's my understanding. I'm not, you can correct me.
In Bengal, as of now, when the elections are going on, is completely driven now by Dalits and the tribals. Is subaltern Hindutva. There's a specific term now in currency in India. Subaltern Hindutva is coming from below, not from the top.
Yeah. And so this is not an uncommon thing where you have an elite ideology and it eventually transitions into something much more populist because that's just what happens. Like institutions change and evolve, so who knows? It could be like who was the Vajpayee? Vajpayee might be the last Brahmin prime minister for a long time. It could be these sorts of things happen where it's like these minority groups, like they've been in power for a long time. You think it's going to be like that. And then it changes, It could be that Modi is now the new template. Like you have to be the leader of a country of poor people. You can't be super rich. I mean, that's just, it's hard to have a connection.
Yeah, but when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao was in power, many people said that he's the last Brahmin Prime Minister of India, and then after 10 years after him, you had Vajpayee. So,
yeah.
So I will not speculate on that because the things may turn out. The caste combinations, the social networks, the kinship networks in India are extremely complex. But you are very right when you write about the Macaulay's children are now losing out. I will have some issue out there because I don't think that the English-speaking elites are being replaced by the vernacular elites. What is happening is that the people who have Indianized English as an Indian language, they are replacing the westernized Macaulite, whatever you want to call them, elite. So I was just interviewing Sanjay Baru, who has written a book on India's power elite. And he mentions that one generation back, if you're going to a fancy restaurant, then Indians would be very uncomfortable looking at the fork and the spoon. They would try to use them, but they will be very embarrassed about it. Now, even if you go to a five-star hotel, people are eating through using their hands and all. They don't give a damn about these Western culture as such. Do you think a new class of Indian is emerging, which is English speaking, but which does not care about the Western opinion and the Western culture because they consider English to be an Indian language now?
Yeah. I'm not, again, like I have to be informed by my observations, like generally in the globe. And I think what's happening is there's be a rebalancing to Asia. Basically, one thing that's happening right now is like the age of white supremacy in like a descriptive sense is ending. And so, Western fashion and trendsetters are still important, but they're becoming less and less important, this is a common issue. So another example I'll give is fast food was introduced to Russia. McDonald's was huge in the 1990s, but now the dominant fast food is not McDonald's, it's Russian forms of fast food. So it's still fast food, but now it's Russian, right? And so indigenization is going to happen. In China, the same sort of thing has happened. I know like 10 years ago, they would still hire white people at like big companies in Shanghai just to be white. So it looks like the company is serious. And recent years, they've stopped hiring white people to have white people at the company. Now they hire white people if they have skills, but that shows you that they're just less concerned with appearances towards a Western audience. And I think that's the same thing that's happening with Hinduism. So I think one of the issues with Hinduism that is legitimate is it's very exotic to Western people in terms of the gods and the images and, Kali and, all of these things. And so Hindus have been embarrassed about it, So I know a lot of Indian Americans who, say things like, well, actually we're monotheistic too. And, the images were just kind of like degenerate or degrade, and I'm an atheist, so I don't care. You can say whatever you want to, but, honestly, privately, I'm just thinking, I think you're trying to satisfy other people and you're embarrassed and you should just, my own attitude, the way I am is I'd own it. I'd be like, yeah, my God's got an elephant. You got a problem with that? You know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't be like, well, actually, I'd just be like, yeah, she got 8 arms.
I
Got a
agree
sword in
with
each arm,
you.
you know?
But that brings us to another point. What is happening in the Western universities, especially in the US and the UK? Lots of Indian people, and especially Hindus, are now feeling that those campuses have become unsafe for Hindus. Forget Hindu nationalists. So, if even if you are a Hindu who is not a woke left or speaking against Hinduism, you are being this is the general opinion now that you will be persecuted. We have seen at the Rutgers, we have seen that in Oxford. In fact, today only someone was calling me up and saying, I don't want to send this kid to London School of Economics because I don't want same thing to happen to her what happened to Rashmi Samant and all. I'm thinking of sending this person to Israel or some other non-Anglosphere country. So why this kind of hostility towards the Hindus for being Hindu? Forget about your political opinions.
Yeah. So I think there's two, my hypothesis, there's two strands. One strand is reflexive bias against polytheistic religions, which is an old tendency. So even if you're a atheist or secular person in the West, your idea is that there's like a almost a Marxist succession. So polytheism to monotheism to atheism. So Hinduism is a more primitive state. So that's still there, even if you're not a Christian fundamentalist or an evangelical, right? So there's still that there. And then the other aspect is caste. That is what they know about Hinduism. That is what they know about India. And if you're woke, you're against caste. You're against American caste, and you're against the oldest caste of all, which is Indian caste. So if you're a Hindu and you, like, for example, I think from what I've seen and heard, if you're a Hindu Brahmin, the way you ingratiate yourself with your woke compatriots is denouncing your caste background incessantly. And if you don't do that constantly, people will be suspicious that you're actually you're casteist. Like, they wouldn't say it because they don't have a word casteist, but they're just like, they know that that's associated with India, and they know that's extremely bad. And you need to figure out a way to detach. And the issue is, I've had discussions with my friends at like Hindu American organizations and Hindu Americans, and they say, well, actually, caste does not have caste does not have anything to do with Hinduism. And again, like, I'm not religious, so I'm just like, religion, in my opinion, religions don't really exist in a platonic sense. They're practiced. And so I just think that I understand what you're saying, but this is like Muslims saying, well, actually, true Islam is peaceful. Okay, great. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, do you see what I'm saying though? So when Hindus say, well, actually, Hinduism is not about caste at all, people are just going to be like, okay, like they're not going to take you seriously. And so I think Hindu Americans need to just confront, like, this was associated with our religion. But, again, it's difficult for me because I don't believe in God. So I don't know how I would say it, but I would be like, I believe in God. I believe this is the Godhead. Okay. I believe that humans, and like a Christian would say, fallen, and there's cultural institutions that got mixed in with the religion, but don't look at me and think that defines me, because I am me. I'm an American Hindu, or I'm a Hindu in India in the year 2021, and my guru is a Dalit, and I will kiss his feet. There are ways you can diffuse it. We're saying, like, you're not this, but I think the history does need to be confronted. Okay, and I think too often they do what Muslims sometimes will do and be like, well, real Islam is about peace. Okay,
Yeah, I can understand that because, if you look from their perspective, especially the early migrants from India were from the forward caste and especially upper caste. So they are let's say, they are not in a very good spot in America as of now if they want to remain a practicing Hindu, because you are, being steamrolled by this woke left saying that you are the cause of all ill. So I think it is problematic because those people are being unfairly targeted, in my opinion. The American Brahmins are being unfairly targeted for something they have no role in, right? So,
so the issue here in the United States that's really strange is no one gives a crap what your caste is. They don't really know. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, 1% of Indian Americans are Dalit. And I've heard stuff about prejudice against Dalits, and I'm like, who the hell is prejudiced against you? You know what I'm saying? Because like you have to live in Cupertino and be surrounded by Indians. Like I'm sure that it happens, but really, like here in the United States, we all look the same. You know, like I had like when I was a kid, people would ask me if I worshipped an elephant every week. Okay, they don't even like know that, I'd have to explain like, well, so my family's Muslim, but I don't actually believe in that either. Like it was a long, complicated explanation. And they were just like, wait, if you're from India, don't you all worship elephants? And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not from India, I'm from Bangladesh. And they're like, well, why do you look Indian? It's like, do you see, these are the types of discussions that I actually had to have. So I think it's really strange how ornate the responses can get.
But perhaps this Hindu should start a bhakti movement in America where you make the idol worship cool again. So this is what happened in the medieval India, when the Islam came in. So the response of the Hindus was a devotional movement centered around the idol worship, which actually, ended up becoming so powerful that it led to Hindu political revivalism. So perhaps this should be the answer to the Americans.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it'll work out. I think it's just, people just need to confront things face on instead of dodging and just avoiding. And so, going back to the unheard piece, like that was, I tried to like kind of grapple with it as analytically as possible, partly because this doesn't affect me. My children are going to melt into the vastness of America. I have nothing to do with the Indian subcontinent. I mean, I do, look at me, but I'm just like, I want India and Bangladesh and Pakistan and all these countries to do well because I want humans to do well. I want people not to be poor. I want them to, this is a Western liberal perspective here, but I want them to actualize their own individual flourishing. And be the best that they can be. And so this is why I'm interested. I'm not interested because I want the Hindu Rashtra to do well or not do well. Like, I mean, I have some opinions, but ultimately they're pretty weak and they're irrelevant because I don't live there. I'm never going to live there. This is about India and Indians. And that's why we should care. I think too often Americans and Westerners, they get involved, but they're talking about their own politics and their own concerns. They don't really care about India. India is like a little mascot. And they're like, we're against caste and we're against these Hindu white supremacists. And I'm like, you don't care. Yeah. You're just like saying things,
It's basically rebranded version of White's Man Burden now.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with India as it is. It has to do with their own imaginings, their own fears, their own hopes, and it's tiresome because these are billions of people here in these countries that are trying to struggle to make, to do better with themselves, and that's what we want, right?
Yeah. My final question to you, Razib, is: do you see any possibility of an Indian modernity or a Hindu modernity emerging in the near future?
Yeah, of course. And I think you have to look at Japan. So Japan is quite Japanese, but it is also quite modern. To be Japan, Indians need to invest in their human capital base. There's serious problems with literacy, functional literacy, all these things. These East Asian nations that are doing really well, they had high literacy even before Western modernity, right? So they had a head start. So I compared Bangladesh to Vietnam like in the 1990s, and I'm like, Vietnam's going to do well because look at their literacy rate. And Vietnam had a lower GDP PPP purchasing power in 1990 than Bangladesh. It was that poor. And now it's doing quite well. So Bangladesh is doing okay, but it started from a lower human capital base because of illiteracy, inequality, all these things. India has to deal with the same thing. So in the near future, is it possible? Like, you're younger than me. I hope you will live to see the day when India is basically a developed country. Maybe there's some pockets of poverty here and there. But yes, of course it's possible. I don't think that there's anything incompatible with being a Hindu of whatever religious orientation and being modern, right? There's tens of millions, hundreds of millions already in India that have entered the modern world, the developed sector. And Japan and China, all these countries, they show that you can have a different civilizational identity and still be modern. Now, it is to some extent still Western because the West birthed modernity, but that's a matter of contingency. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to accept Christ and all the liberal individualism. It doesn't mean you have to abolish joint families. That's a choice that different cultures have to make. As you probably know, Japan did have a period of like Western mania after the Meiji Restoration. And what they realized is they didn't need to do all of this stuff, and they kept some of it and they dropped a lot of it. Right. And so India didn't really go through Western mania, but I think that it did have an idea after World War II, India and the Third World in general. You have to be Western capitalist, or you have to be communist. You have to basically ape
Western model.
the white countries. However, that's the way. But I think East Asia is showing that there's a different way. Right?
Yeah. But sorry, I said it's the last question, but
yeah,
you talked about Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is doing really good, and it's a matter of great satisfaction as an Indian to see Bangladesh doing good, because stability in Bangladesh means stability for India as well. What about Pakistan? What's happening out there? Which direction is the Pakistan going from where you see it?
That's called a leading question because you know what direction it's going. It's sad because Bangladesh was a basket case my whole life, and now people in Bangladesh are just like, ooh, Pakistan, or Pakistan. You know what I'm saying? They're just like, yeah. So the issue with Pakistan is like, it can't be a world power. It doesn't have the population, the power. It doesn't have the economy, but it still wants to be. It wants to be parity with India. But this is like Stanford versus San Francisco State. San Francisco State is just going to waste its time trying to match Stanford, and so I think Pakistan wastes a lot of its mental, cultural, economic energy trying to match India. When, look, you're not going to match India. There's just too many of them, okay? So it's a fool's errand. Nobody cares enough about South Asia. It's not the Cold War. You can't do that anymore. So I think Bangladesh's, genius strategy was just like, well, we're a medium-sized country, at least in a South Asian context. We're not going to geopolitically commit. So let's focus on the, manufacturing sector, export-oriented growth, and not be a world power. And that's done great for it because, you have a finite amount of resources fiscally. Don't spend it on the military. I think Pakistan's issue is it had its eyes on a prize that was never attainable. It was not ever going to be the great rival to India, even when Bangladesh was part of it.
But that's a different thing. But what is happening in Pakistan internally? How do you read that?
I think internally the issue is Pakistan has to create its own identity because it's a multi-ethnic state with a large minority of Shia. I mean, this is difficult. This is difficult. It doesn't have a coherent identity that can bring everyone together because Sunni Islamism only has purchase among so many. If you look at it in terms of electorally, right? I think Pakistan's problem is it's a post-colonial state in a way that Bangladesh is not. Bangladesh is an ethno-state. It was founded as an ethno-state. So in a way, Bangladesh is more like a Southeast Asian country. It's like Vietnam. Vietnam is the nation of the Vietnamese. Bangladesh is the nation of the Bangladeshis. What the hell is a Pakistani? Are you talking about Punjabi?
We asked about India as well. What the hell is
India? It could, but India has a more coherent modern ideology.
Oh.
Okay, Pakistan has let's be honest, it's like,
is Hindutva also part of that modern ideology in India?
Wait, can you say that part again?
You say India has a coherent modern ideology.
Yeah.
Hindutva is the part of it.
I think it's part of it. I think the issue with Pakistan specifically is it's an Islamic republic, but it's still actually a post-colonial state that has British, you know what I'm saying? So it's got this schizophrenia where it's like, oh, we're Muslims, Saudi Arabia, but they don't execute like Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, Sharia is part of the law, but it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not really an Islamic state. It's just an Islamic state in identity and a name. And so I think the schizophrenia causes problems. If Pakistan had Islam as the religion of the state or whatever Bangladesh has, which is kind of nominal, okay, that's just something that you put there, But Pakistan actually tries to do things as if it's an Islamic state. That just causes problems, And so I think that if it had a more realistic vision, it would do better. But I think it doesn't have a realistic vision. It's really a post-colonial state that has a British legacy, and it needs to grapple with that, like India has and is. It's not some magically created Islamic republic. That's just the name that it gave it. But Zia and his heirs, they tried to execute it multiple times. You're 20% Shia. If India tried to become a Hindu trad state, that would be a problem. I think that's the analogy. So I think that's Pakistan's problem.
Okay, perhaps we can have a discussion on Pakistan separately sometime. But
Sure.
thank you, Razib, for talking to us.
My last name is Khan, so I can comment on
Yes, Mr.
Pakistan.
Khan, so thank you for talking to Indians. And we hope that you don't rule us again.
Take care, man.
And thank you, audience, for listening to us. And please don't forget to subscribe and join the channel. See you soon.